Hello everyone and welcome to the National Women in Transport Networking Lunch. My name is Narelle Rogers. I'm the Executive Advisor for Rail Capability and Engagement at the National Transport Commission, and it's my pleasure to be your MC today. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we meet today, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to elders both past and present. A few housekeeping notes for today. If you have not already, it'd be greatly appreciated if you could pop your phones on silent. And if you joined us earlier, you'll note that we have morning tea, but we will also finish formalities with a networking lunch at 1:30 after our keynote. To introduce our keynote speaker, I'd like to introduce Carolyn Walsh, Chair of the National Transport Commission. Please join me in welcoming Carolyn to the stage.
Thanks, Narelle, and welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. And what a beautiful spot to do this in. It's always great to be back in Canberra. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Ngunnawal people because I grew up on that country. It extends out past Yass and Bowning, and if you know Bowning Hill, I tromped up there many a time in my youth. And fortunately in those days, well, I'll start from the unfortunately in those days, we weren't ever taught anything about Aboriginal cultural history. It was just absent from any curricula. Look, honestly, we knew nothing. But at the bottom of Bowning Hill, there was a sign saying, "This is Ngunnawal country." And I always knew that I was on Ngunnawal country. And I put it to a lot of Anglo folks of my era about whether they know what the name of the country is that they grew up on, and many don't. So I do feel very pleased that I at least knew what the name of this country was around this area. So I do want to pay my respect to their elders as well. Today's event is a celebration of the National Transport and Women's Network, so thank you for coming. And it's also to acknowledge the Speaker Bureau, which is our key offering as part of this networking arrangement. And it really is an opportunity to catch up with old friends and make some new ones. So I do hope you have the opportunity to do that today. We started a tradition a year ago of encouraging people to bring new emerging leaders into this meeting, and I can see a few youngsters around the place, so I think that's actually happened, so well done, and you're welcome here as well. We really do want this to be an encouraging place for women of all backgrounds, ages and career ambitions to actually network together and get to know each other. So why are we here beyond that? Well, transport is the third most male-dominated industry in Australia, behind, Jo, the mining and construction areas. So we're looking forward to your tips about how you deal with it in your area. But our industry, as yours is, booming. There's a lot of work on at the moment. The transport business is growing the rail business is growing by 6% a year in terms of what we need to attract something like 40,000 people a year into our industry. So even if you look at it just purely from a selfish industry perspective, tapping into women in the industry and ensuring that this is a welcoming and inviting place for women to come into the industry is so important because of that demand we're going to have for more workers in this industry over the next couple of years. So we need to create a modern, diverse, inclusive environment, and I'm sure we're going to hear a bit about that from Jo today in her sector. We need to break down some of the stereotypical things that still happen in these male-dominated sectors. I was laughing the other day, somebody had suggested Safe in New South Wales put a safe work notice onto a hospital saying that they should always ensure that there's a male nurse whenever there is any patient who is likely to become aggressive. Now, given that any patient in a hospital is likely to may become aggressive, coming out of anaesthetic or different circumstances, that would mean that pretty soon 90% of the nursing population in Sydney would need to be men. And I thought the good news about that is in 10 years' time they'll be well paid. So, as you know, this network is an initiative of industry and government. Transport ministers agreed to support this back in 2021, and we launched the network in March 2022. It's grown rapidly. We do get a lot of people visiting the website and looking at the materials there. And our flagship product, as I say, is the Women's Speakers Bureau. We started with 15 profiles on the website. We're now up to 80. So we have 80 senior women across the transport transport sector whose profile is there, so there's no longer any excuse for people to say, oh, I couldn't find a chick to do the speech. We are around. So it's a really terrific thing that the team's done in pulling that together. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Jo. Jo, welcome. Jo is a qualified carpenter by trade, and she is the 2024 ACT Australian of the Year and the 2024 ACT Woman of the Year. So has very much been recognised in the local community for the leadership she brings in her industry. As I say, qualified carpenter by trade, licensed builder, certified building designer, and now general manager of a multi-million-dollar commercial construction company. Jo has worked up from the ground, literally, to be in a senior management role that she's in now. Her journey started in 1996, but I'm not going to tell you too much about that because I'm sure Jo's going to tell us all about that. What I would like to point out is she's worked in both commercial and residential stuff. She's also had a 3-year stint in Lithuania on a nuclear decommissioning project. Whoa, that would have been interesting. She's passionate about seeing more women in the construction sector, and she's founded a national not-for-profit charity organisation called Build Like a Girl in September 2020. I love that title. It's just really, really good. And that is a direct call to action to help support and mentor women in the construction industry. Jo has served as a board member for the YWCA, on the National Association of Women in Construction and Tradeswomen Australia, as well as being actively involved with Busy Sisters, the Melbourne East Group Training Australia, Empowered Women in Trades and Trellis Collective to assist with grant approvals, funding applications and mentor program delivery. So this is really, really good stuff, Jo. Looking forward very much to hearing from you. So that's enough from me. Over to you. Welcome, please. Welcome, Jo, to the stage.
Thank you very much. When you listed that out, I just felt really tired. I'm going to move around. If I stand there, I'll annoy you with my fidgeting. And the other thing I'll apologise for is I found that now that I do public speaking, I get the sniffles, and that's how my anxiety manifests. So if I keep sniffing, I apologise. It's really annoying for me as well. So that's just a thing that happens. Thank you, anxiety. Thank you again. We'll also pay my respects to Ngunnawal people. I'm very, very privileged to work on Ngunnawal country and to actually have Ngunnawal women who work side by side with Build Like a Girl to take us on their journey around the barriers they face, which are very different to people with white skin. So we are very close to that, and apologies for the humidity. This is really out of character for Canberra, and I've just come from a construction site, so I'm very dewy. So. As you heard, there's a lot there. The Australian of the Year stuff and the ACT Woman of the Year stuff came out of left field and really floored me quite a bit because it was completely unexpected. I'll tell you the reason why. So let's go back in time a while. So I grew up in Dapto, Wollongong. If anyone's from Wollongong, Dapto even? No? Good, because I'm going to talk about it and it's not nice. So, average upbringing. Have an older brother, he's useless. He doesn't work in construction, he's IT guy. Apologies to any IT people. So he used to really hate me when I was growing up because I used to steal all the Lego. I would throw a Barbie in his room as a consolation prize. It got thrown back out, and we fought a lot because I was really attracted to building. Mum said it was just a Lego thing. That's how I spent all my time when I was little. If I saw a construction site, I loved it. There was just something innate in terms of I was really fascinated by how things got put together. So it was always a done thing. I was really lucky that when I was a little kid, that's what I wanted to be. And a lot of the time you don't. However, what I didn't realise is that despite the fact that I had a really supportive family, both my mum and dad said, great, you want to be a builder, you can fix stuff around the house, champion. The rest of society didn't really like the idea. The first taste I got of that was probably in year 8 in my metalwork and woodworking class when I was just segregated at the back. And I always got pushed out of the way and got all the crappy tools and never got the good stuff and was just left. And I don't think the actual teacher ever spoke to me in those classes. I was just kind of left there. And so it was a really, really weird experience. I didn't quite understand it at that time. In year 10, I went and saw my careers counsellor in Wollongong. The done thing was if you wanted to get into a trade, your safest and best bet was to do work experience at the steelworks. That's where your dad or your uncle or your brother or cousin, someone you knew generally worked there. So all the boys in our school would go and work at the steelworks, and I thought, great, this is my in. So I went and sat in the office and he said, what do you want to do? And I said, can I go to the steelworks, please? And he said, why in the world would you want to go there? And I said, because I want to do an apprenticeship. And he said, if you want an apprenticeship, go and be a hairdresser. And I just went, not the same thing. And that was it, end of conversation. So I went home and said, Mum, they won't let me do this and they're not going to organise it. And she went, okay. She worked at Wollongong University at the time. She was the cashier. And the best she could wrangle at that time was for me to work with the mechanical engineering department, to sit for a week with them, which was okay. However, that just meant I sat in mechanical engineering lectures the whole week and fell asleep, and I did not understand a word of what they said. So she tried, wasn't quite right. So that was kind of my first feeling of, hey, why isn't this supported? There's something going on here. In year 11, I really started struggling with school. I'd been struggling with it for a while, but it manifested in year 11 when you start to actually, sit all these exams and it starts to get serious. And I couldn't work out what was going on. And I actually remember a point in time in year 11 physics where my teacher held up our exam results, held up my paper and declared to the room, you're officially the dumbest person in the class. He wasn't a nice guy. I think he was related to the careers counsellor, I think. That was a moment in time for me that I was already struggling with a number of things, feeling that first level of rejection on a number of fronts, and then to be told that. A few years later, at the age of 22, I was diagnosed with dyslexia. But at that point in time, it was just, you're just dumb. You just can't get it and you can't do the work. So I was one of those kids that kind of fumbled my way through. And when I got to year 12 and sat my exams, by that time I'd checked out. Mentally, I was not in a great place. Didn't understand what that was, realised now it was probably depression and severe anxiety. We didn't talk about that in the 90s. And so it was just something of just deal with it. I got a little red dot as a mark in year 12 for my HSC, which meant we're not even going to bother giving you a score because it's so low. So yes, you finished school, but you didn't do that great. Go out into the world and survive. My teachers at the time turned around and said, good luck. We don't know how you're going to get through this. And that was how I left school. That was fine. I was glad to see the back of it. I didn't want to see those teachers anymore, and I knew that I could make this on my own terms. So again, and we were just talking about, back in the day with no internet, there was no seek.com if you wanted a job. If you wanted a job, you looked in the newspaper, you looked at vacancies in Windows, you went and dropped your CV off. So that's what I did. So I went to every single building site, building company, you name it, in the greater Wollongong region and said, here's my CV, I want an apprenticeship, will you give me a go? I don't know the exact number, I can't quite recall, it's upwards of 150 that all said no. We don't employ women, we don't want you on our site, you're not strong enough, you're not smart enough, you'll be a distraction, why in the world do you want to do this? It varied from kind of generic responses to kind of, you don't belong here. Over 150 of those. So, and that was all face-to-face. Again, not on internet, not on email, that was phone call, that was face-to-face, we don't want you. I did find a guy, and I think he somehow knew our family in some way, and I saw a small opening and a small weakness in this guy. And for the purposes, just in case anyone is from Wollongong, we're going to call him Barry. So I kept going back and I wore Barry down. And eventually he turned around and said to me, fine, you can come on Monday and I'll give you a go, but you're going to work for nothing for 3 months. And if you survive that, then we'll talk about it. And I went, great. At that time, I didn't know what modern slavery was, so I just agreed to it and thought, I will get a whole bunch of other part-time jobs around this full-time, non-paying job, and I will make this work because this is my in. So what happened then, and I got all excited and, told mum and dad, and great, I was all happy, and so I turned up on Monday morning and walked into this site. It was a residential site, and Barry walked up and gave me a shovel and said, here you go, dig a hole. And I went, perfect, no problems, I can dig holes. I can show you how strong I am. So I started digging a hole. And I kept digging and I kept digging, and I said, how big do you need this hole, and when should I stop? And he said, don't ask questions, I'll tell you when you can stop. So I dug, and I dug all day. And when they walked past for smoko, I kept digging, and when they walked past for lunch, I kept digging, and I wore all the silly comments and all the things that were said, and I kept digging. And so by that afternoon, I was standing in a hole that kind of resembled my grave, and He finally walked over and said, okay, fill it back in. And I said, okay. And he said, are you coming back tomorrow? And I said, yeah. And he went, okay. And so I went home. How was your first day? Great, I dug this hole. I was super excited. I thought, I didn't know what the hole was for, but I'm sure there's a purpose to this. There was a purpose to this, because the next day I turned up and Barry gave me the shovel. This went on all week. Every day I dug a hole, all day, every day I filled it back in. The purpose was to degrade and belittle and make me see that I didn't belong there. My job and my purpose was to keep turning up and digging holes until I wore them down. And so it began for 3 months, the battle of wills. I'm not going to stand here and say it didn't affect me. Of course it did. I went home and cried every afternoon. And Mum turned around and said, go back and prove to them that you can do it. So that's what I kept doing. So it wasn't just the hole digging, it was all the other stuff. It was using my lunchbox as a toilet. It was stealing my things, shoes, tools, clothing. It was, the age-old pushing me over in the portaloo, locking me in the portaloo for hours, not just a short amount of time. There was no one there to hear me. So it was going to be, how much could I endure and tolerate? When were they going to run out of these ideas? And so it went for 3 months. And it was gross and it was nasty, but I still kept turning up because I knew I could do the job. So the 3 months went by and Barry walked over one afternoon and he put some papers on the table in the side office and he said, fine, I'll sign you up, but I still don't think you belong in this industry. Now, this is the end of my 28th year, almost 29 years. So I would like to think that I got one up on old Barry and that he was wrong in that little one. But that was the introduction to the industry. Did that stop when I signed that paper? Absolutely not. It went on for another 2 years. Now, surprisingly, and this will come as a great shock, but Barry went bankrupt and got divorced. Who knew? Like, Barry, stand-up guy, his wife left him and he lost his business. It was shocking. So the issue with that for me, though, was no one else would give me a job in Wollongong. Just wouldn't, even though I had 2 years under my belt, still would not employ a girl as a carpenter. So I said to Mum, I'm going to have to leave. I'm going to have to go to Sydney. There's more work opportunities. I can't stay here. I've got to go. So I went to Sydney and I got a job pretty much straight away with a commercial company. They still didn't really want me. They just needed someone and I happened to be there. And so it completely changed things though, because there was a lot more people, it was bigger jobs. I went from working on a residential site with maybe 30 blokes to big construction sites of upwards of 300. So then the game changed a little bit. So what I had to start thinking of is not getting locked in the portaloo, but how do I use the men's toilets when there's 20 guys in there? When there's 10 guys at a urinal and the cubicles, where's my point where I kind of can announce myself and get in there safely and get out safely? So these are all the things that men don't think about. And I don't think a man's ever had to be that scared when he's approached a female bathroom in the odd occasion they've had to do it. So I had to get these layers of things. So I wasn't allowed in the basement. So in high-rise buildings, when you construct them, change rooms, all those areas are down in the basement of the buildings. That was a no-go for me. I was told unequivocally, do not go there because we can't make you safe and we can't protect you and no one can hear you. So imagine being 19 years old and being told that on a workplace. So these are all the things that I had to think about. I had to think in the morning, if it was dark in winter, how I would get from my car parking space into that building safely. I would have to make sure that where I was working in that building, there was always someone near me who was a friend, not a foe. And I had to endure rape threats, sexual assault threats, through the crack of the door of the urinal and the cubicle every single day. So I used to actually have a lot of medical conditions because I wouldn't want to use the toilet. I wouldn't drink, I wouldn't eat all day, so I didn't have to use the bathroom and avoid it. Something changed at a point in time, and this went on for a long time, and I thought, is this really what I want to do? Is this going to be life? Because nothing's really changing here. It's just changing in its extremities. So I was in the toilets one day and there was pretty much the same people who would look through the cracks in the doors. And all of a sudden there was a kerfuffle and a guy barged in, and there was a lot of screaming and shouting, and then everyone left, and there was a tap on the door saying, "Jo, you can come out now." And I stepped out, and there was a little Welsh man about this big with red hair, and his name was Jeff Powell, and he was the site manager on this site. And he turned around and said, "I didn't realise this was happening, but this will never happen again on my job. You can come out, all those men are gone, and they're not coming back to this site." One man out of how many hundreds, over how many years, stood up. Look around the room and see how many men are in this room right now. So Phil, you're like Uncle Jeff. So good on you for actually standing up, because this is the whole issue. We need more Jeffs and Phils. Not everyone was looking through the crack, not everyone was saying those things, but a hell of a lot of guys were walking past and not saying a single word. And that is what is happening every single time. I would be asking, why aren't there more Phils in the room today? It's not our problem to drag you here by the scruff of your neck. Phil's obviously here because he has the same values. So that changed for me. I finally had a guy who stood up for me, and I thought, hey, they're not all bad. There's actually some good ones. I am still best friends with Uncle Jeff, which is why I call him Uncle Jeff now. We've been friends for many, many years. He's been a massive supporter. He has probably been one of the single driving forces in my career, more so than a lot of women. So as this time went on, I started getting a bit more confidence. I had some form of level of protection and someone in my corner. I was able to start doing my job. And lo and behold, when I was able to do my job without thinking about all of that safety stuff and all of that danger, I was actually really good. So I very quickly became a supervisor. I very quickly became a leading hand. I very quickly got asked to become a project manager for a company. And I thought, wow, this is really great. Things are on the up and up now. And then, after a little bit of time about being a project manager and managing all these projects for a facade company and doing a whole bunch of work and thinking this is my career on the rise, another thing came slamming into me out of the blue. And it was in the shape of a pay slip from the company I was working for. That was not just my pay slip, but the pay slip of 3 other men who were doing the same job as me. And the lady apologised and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I accidentally sent this to you." It wasn't an accident. So what I found was these guys doing the same job. In fact, they were doing less projects than me, getting less repeat clients than me, getting less positive performance reviews than me, were getting paid 3 times as much as me, and a company car thrown in for good use. And I was on $46,000 a year. And I thought I was on a good wicket, and then that hit me. And once you get told that, or you see that in black and white, it takes root inside you and you can't get rid of it. And that's what happened with me. And I was devastated that I was doing so much and getting paid so little compared to what those guys were doing. I thought, what do I do? And the universe works in weird ways. They sent Uncle Jeff, and then they decided to send someone else. I got wind of the National Association of Women in Construction, NAWIC, and an event, and I got told to go to it. Jo, just go there, there's other women in construction, go and find a network. Admittedly, I was the only tradeswoman in there. I walked in high vis and boots, and I was, sweaty and gross as normal, and everyone else was in high heels and makeup, and so it was a little bit intimidating. But I walked in on the night that they had their mentoring program running, and so I signed up as a mentee, and I pretty much got awarded the professional lottery, I think, when I got matched with a lady named Alison Myrams. Now, if you don't know her, she's a great person to look up. At the time, she was the first regional construction director for Multiplex. She later started a construction company called Roberts Co., which is now a tier 1 multi-million-dollar company that rivals Lendlease and others. She started that off her own bat. She is a powerhouse, and I got matched with her as a mentor. She got wind of what was going on with my pay. After a while, she said, "What's going on with you? There's something eating you up. What is it? Tell me." And I told her. And she went, "Right, here's what you're going to do. We're going to draft 2 letters. One is what you want to get paid and why, and one is your resignation letter, and you're going to walk in and have a meeting with your directors and tell them." And I went, "There is no way in the world I'm doing that. No way in the world." And she goes, "Yes, you are." So we went through this for a number of weeks. And we had these letters drafted, and she kept, "Have you organised a meeting? Have you organised a meeting?" No. And in the end, it was a choice between my fear of confronting them and my fear of confronting her. And I chose to confront them because I didn't want to confront her. And so I said, fine. So it was the whole, voice shaking, sweating, I'm going to be sick. I'm talking to these men that run this company who already don't value me. And I remember she rang me of the morning that I was walking in there and she said, I've just got one piece of advice, and if everything else fails, just remember this, please. If you don't value yourself, no one else will. It starts with you. And I was like, great, okay. Deep breath, here we go. So I walked in, and there were 3 brothers who ran this company, older men. And I sat there and said, thank you for the meeting, and I pleaded my case and said, here are all the reasons why. And they sat there for a while, and I felt quite confident. I'd gotten it out of my system. I thought, this is actually going really well. I didn't cry too much. And so I didn't cry at all at that point. Very nervous. And so they sat there for a second, and then one of them turned around and said, you should be grateful you even have this job. And I said, and just my heart sunk. And I thought, this isn't going to work out. And all of a sudden then came reasons of, you haven't done your time. Your technical skills are not quite there. And there were all these kind of very generic reasons that really didn't hold too much weight. And they kind of listed them off, and I could tell that they were all pre-rehearsed, and they were all very gendered. And I sat there and I just went, God, it's just, they're never, ever going to see me as someone worthy. So with Alison's words in mind, I very shakily slid my resignation letter across the table to them. And what ensued was probably one of the largest man tantrums I have ever seen to date in my career, and boy have I seen some man tantrums. It just went nuts about how ungrateful I was and everything else, and how much they'd invested in me, and that all of these things. And I just said, I'm really sorry it's turned to this, but I have to go. I had no idea what I was going to do. I just knew I had to leave. So I walked out and I phoned Alison, crying my eyes out, and said, I did it. And she said, great. You've got an interview on Monday with this company. All I have done is tell them your name, make sure you're on time. The rest is up to you. Go for it. So I went to the interview, and a week later I got paid $140,000 in an operations manager role, and that was that, and that was done. So I'm giving you the advice Alison gave to me, if any of you are in that same situation. If you don't value yourself, no one else is going to do it for you. Walk away and find someone who does. It will be okay. There is always going to be someone out there who will value you. So that was the trajectory, right? All of a sudden things started again. So Uncle Jeff, Alison, here we go. So things were moving in the right direction now. I was getting paid really well. I was spending a lot of money on things I didn't need, all those usual things. And then all of a sudden, again, the universe stopped me dead in my tracks. 2 weeks before my 30th birthday, I got hit with a severe medical incident, which meant I had to have emergency surgery, which meant I would not be able to have children. It was just a bang, you don't have a choice in this is going to happen. So not only was it an incredibly invasive surgery, it was also a really significant recovery period. So that stopped me from obviously pursuing the career stuff straight away, but it also made me stand back and look back at what I'd been doing. And all I'd done since school was try to prove to people that I could do a job. I hadn't travelled, I'd never taken a holiday. I'd never done anything. All I had done was been on the hamster wheel, trying to prove that I could exist in this world. And what did that mean? Because now everything had changed for me. And so I turned around to Mum and Dad again and went, I'm going to go overseas. I think I need to go and see what's out there, and I need to actually understand who I am, because I'm trying to prove something to other people and I don't really know what I want to do now. What is it that I want out of this life? So I packed my bags, and I had an Irish passport thanks to my dad, which meant no Schengen visas, can travel around Europe until the money runs out. So, and I didn't have that much money, so that was probably going to be a given. So I said, look, when I get homesick or run out of cash, I'll be home. Mum had travelled a lot when she was younger, so she was like, go for it. Full support. So I did that, and I travelled around a bit. I travelled all around London and a few other countries, and a lot of time in Ireland, and did definitely run out of money really quickly. So I thought, I don't want to go home yet. I want to see where this is going to lead. So at that time, you could apply for jobs online now. And so that's what I started doing. I remember this distinctly. I was sitting in a pub in London. I was sitting there with a pint and my laptop, because that's what you do when you're Australian and you're unemployed. And I was looking for all these jobs and just thought, I'm going to be like every other Aussie and I'll just end up working in London. And I got this phone call from this lovely gentleman with this beautiful Kentish accent. And it was so polished that I thought, this is someone I know playing a prank. And I was incredibly sarcastic to this poor gentleman. And he's like, hello, Jo, I've seen your CV and I have this great opportunity. And I'm like, oh, yes, sounds wonderful. And he said, only catch is it's in Lithuania. And I'm like, oh, Lithuania, sounds fantastic. And I jumped online, like, where's Lithuania? I don't know where that is. I thought it was down near Serbia and other places. That shows you how naive I was. So I'm like, yeah, great, Lithuania, tell me all about it. So at this point, I'm like, this is someone I know, just pulling my leg. Punchline will come through any moment. So he starts telling me about this nuclear power plant and this EU-funded project and, where it's located and what's going on there and what they need. And I'm sort of listening, going, this is a very elaborate prank, but we'll get there. And he said, look, they want to fly you over for an interview, will we go? And I just kind of went, God, this is getting a bit extreme, but okay. And I'm like, sure, I'll go to Lithuania, let's go. And so next minute, he actually said, what's your email address? Next minute, flight tickets pop up in my inbox. And also the details of this power plant. And I'm like, this is so elaborate. This is great, guys. Good on you. Power plant does exist. It's a real place. And anyway, it turned out to be legit. And it turns out I was really rude to this guy. And I did end up calling him and apologising. But at the time, I was just like, this is not happening. So I'm a bit of an adventurous, spirit. And so I thought, what's the worst that can happen? Free trip to Lithuania, whatever, if I don't get the job. So I jumped on a plane. This was in January 2009, and off I went to Lithuania, and I flew into Vilnius Airport. I don't know if anyone's been there. It's about the size of Canberra Airport, but with a lot more snow and a lot more Russian people. Are there any Russian people in the room? Okay, good. So it's as bad as Dapto. So I flew in, and it was minus 16. And it started getting real dark real quick because in January, it's the middle of winter. And I did not understand this, and I also didn't look at the weather. So I was severely underdressed. So flew in and got to the airport very late, not many people around, and a little Russian man holding my name who did not speak a word of English. So great conversation on the 2.5-hour drive out of town. As I'm driving out, that is the moment when I'm sitting in a old, bashed up black Audi with really dark tinted windows with a Russian man that doesn't speak English on my own in Eastern Europe, and when this might not have been a good idea, Jo. Are you about to be trafficked over the border? You idiot. Mum's going to be there going, I raised her better than this. I don't know what happened. That is when my anxiety just went into overdrive. And that is when my mind went back to my Year 9 Taekwondo classes. And I'm like, if I have to fight this man at some point, do I remember how to do this? The answer is no. I remembered all my patterns and I didn't remember any other thing. So I just started having a severe anxiety attack in this car. Pitch black, snow, middle of Lithuania, heading roughly towards the Belarusian and Latvian border. Scary. So as I just melted into the seat in a pool of anxiety and thought I might just play dead because I can't fight, didn't know what I was going to do. All of a sudden, these massive lights came out of nowhere, and here's this nuclear power plant. And I just went, oh, okay, maybe it's still going to be okay. So turned up, and it was a real job, and it was real people. We nicknamed it the United Nations. It had just about everyone. I was the only Aussie, but pretty much from all over Europe. So, Austrians, Bulgarians, Russians, Latvians, Lithuanians, German designers, German engineers, a lot of English guys. So it was a real thing. So landed, had an interview, and they said, did you bring a bag, can you stay? And I went, no, I didn't even know if this was a real thing. I just came for, shits and giggles, really. And so he said, look, fly back, pack your stuff, be here in 2 days' time. So it was meant to be a 6-month contract just to help him out. I still don't understand my role. They called me an architectural engineer. That's not a thing. I to this day sort of still wonder what I was actually contributing, but learnt a lot, and it was a real job. And after 6 months, they extended my contract, and then after another 6 months, they extended my contract, and so it went. So Lithuania is a really interesting place, and this power plant was a really interesting place. Old power plant, Chernobyl type thing, bubbling away in the distance. Safety brief was if the alarms go, run for your life just in any direction, because that's all you can do when that happens. And I sort of laughed and went, yeah, so what's the real one? They're like, run for your life in any direction. So that was that. My day consisted of climbing tower cranes to confiscate bottles of vodka from crane drivers and generally trying to get them to do construction work, which is very, very difficult when they're drunk 99% of the time. I had to learn Russian because I had to work out what they were saying about me. And so I very quickly learned that Russians have a very broad swearing vocabulary, and they're fantastic swear words. And I still know them now, and I'm not going to say them, but if someone was Russian in the room, I probably would, because it'd be funny. I grew up real quick, and one of the reasons I had to grow up real quick was I had to realise that in the environment I was in, there was a very different perception about how women should be treated. I was the only female allowed out on site. All of the other women who were there were administrators or had office roles, and they were absolutely not permitted out on site, not allowed. They weren't even allowed to have an opinion on it. So I ended up getting that law or that rule released because I couldn't speak the language and I needed translators. The only translators were female. So I had a Lithuanian translator and a Russian translator. They hated each other's guts because Russia had obviously still been operating the KGB in 1993. That was still very fresh for Lithuanian people. I knew nothing about their history, and I felt very naive to not understand all of the legacy and all the issues around what these people had endured for a long, long time. So I had to grow up in that sense. I had to learn my history. I had to understand their culture. I also had to understand that women were a second-class citizen. I also had to understand that women walking in with black eyes and busted lips was something you just didn't speak about. It was a given. That's a family issue, and that's completely fine, and that is none of your business. And I'm not saying that that doesn't exist here, because we know it does. But when it's in your face in a workplace and no one's allowed to tolerate it and talk about it, that's a very different environment to be in, particularly for someone who advocates very strongly for women in this space. So that was me having to grow up and having to zip my lip and understand that. I couldn't overtly or actively change that, but there were things I could do to empower women in that space. And I would like to think that there were things that I did and conversations that were had that started to at least let people know that they had to change their mindset. I'm not for a second going to claim that I did. I would like to think there was at least a conversation there though. So Lithuania was the adventure. I ended up leaving there after 3 years, and I decided that probably time to go home. And so I was going to take the long way and I'm going to travel for 12 months. I chucked a backpack on. I sent a lot of stuff home to mum, and I thought I'll just travel. So I spent 4 months in South America. I spent 3 months in Africa, did some volunteering work, building some stuff there. And it was actually when I was in Botswana that I got a phone call from a cousin saying, "You need to come home." And I said, "Why, what's going on?" And he said, "Your mum hasn't told you, but your dad was diagnosed 3 years ago with dementia, and she's been dealing with it ever since. And he's declined really rapidly, but she didn't want to ruin your trip." So my family had been dealing with that, and he had a very severe, aggressive form of dementia. And so I ended up having to very quickly get myself out of Africa and get myself home to support my family and my parents. He declined very quickly. If anyone has had to deal with it, it's an insidious disease. It's horrible, not for the person with dementia so much as for the people around. So that was really hard to come crashing back to that, because I just lived this wild adventure, and all of a sudden the reality of it came back. I'd like to think that I've dealt with it in a mature way, but I probably didn't. I wasn't prepared for it, and even though all those things that I'd learnt overseas didn't really prepare me for what that was. What it meant also is I had to start over. So all these things that I'd done, all this experience in Sydney, where I got to there, the things that I did overseas, I came back. I knew I didn't want to go to Sydney again, and so I came to Canberra because it was the next closest place to Wollongong where my family were. I came to Canberra and I applied for a site manager role, and I got told by a female recruiter, "You don't have enough experience." And I was just shocked and thought, what are you talking about? But what she meant is that no one knows you, and Canberra's a very different place, and it's built on relationships. No one knows who you are, and no one cares where you've been. So it was about re-establishing myself. So after all that time, all the things I'd navigated, Jo, you are starting again. And that's what I did. Funnily enough, who should pop up on the Stage 1 light rail project that I went and worked on? Uncle Jeff. Turns up like a penny. And so we got to reunite again and go through that. And it was around that time, and I started hearing stories and experiences from a lot of other younger women who were coming through about their really crappy experiences in construction. Because I'd been siloed and never really been around women, so I didn't know their stories. But now things had changed. I'd been away for a while. Canberra's pretty progressive, and there were a lot more women who were starting to make their forays in, and all of a sudden, I started hearing all of these things, exactly what had happened to me. And it started festering away and festering away. A few years in, I got offered the role to become General Manager of Kane Constructions. They're a very large national company, do work all over the eastern seaboard. They interviewed 21 people. I was the only female. And I asked them why they ended up choosing me. And they said, because you didn't talk about yourself and all the wonderful things you've done. You just spoke about how you want to bring the company to the next level and bring a lot more women and diversity into the company. You didn't even speak about yourself. And that was the point of difference for them. They wanted someone who was going to go in a completely different direction. When I got that role, it was a bit of a buzz here because not many women were holding roles like that. I think there were 2 of us at the time. And what it created was a swell of people inboxing me and reaching out on social media and other mechanisms to say, I'm finding it really tough, do you have any advice? I also had a huge amount of women who wanted to become tradeswomen and said, I've applied for jobs and no one will give me a job. And it was the same things, you're not strong enough, you're not smart enough, we don't want women on site. This was 4 years ago. Same things as were said to me. And so I was asked before, how did Build Like a Girl come about? Build Like a Girl is built on pure rage. It runs on rage, it's fueled by rage, we channel rage, and that is simply how it was. I sat at my dining room table one weekend in 2020 and said, how do I fix this? Because I was always given a choice by mum. I can whinge and do something, or I don't get to whinge. You can't have it any other way. You don't get to whinge if you're going to sit there and say and do nothing. And that's how it should be for everyone. So I decided I'm still going to whinge, but I'll actually fix the problem. Massive whinger, I whinge all the time. So that's how Build Like a Girl was born. And, you know, it was sitting there and going, what do I need to do and what does it need to serve the purpose for? And it was to serve the purpose for women that are shut out of an industry that doesn't value them and isn't willing to give them a go. It's that simple. I kick the door down. That's my job. I kick it in for you and then you walk in, you do the rest, and then I'll be waiting on the outside, just like Alison, just like Uncle Jeff. That is all of our jobs. No matter where you are, in your role, in your industry, no matter what you do, whether you work part-time, whether you work casual, whether you're at the top of the food chain or whether you think you're at the bottom, that is your job. Your job is to kick the door in. Because if everybody was kicking a door in for everyone else, we wouldn't even have a problem. Got to kick more doors in, Phil, please. Big boots. So that's the job, and that's my job. It's to make the industry better. And I'm not going to be able to do it in my lifetime. I'm not, big-headed or egotistical enough to think I can fix all these problems. But here's some examples of how I think things need to be fixed. So on the public speaking thing that I'm doing, and I'm not comfortable with it, and you can tell by the way I wander around that it's a bit of a weird space. But things need to be said and things need to be heard. So let me tell you some things I think you need to hear. How we change culture in any industry is not by changing the perpetrator. I'm not sure about your industry statistics, but for me, the people who cause trouble, the people who make us feel unwelcome and unsafe, are only about 20% of the industry. They're not the majority. The Phils and the Jeffs of the world are the majority. So the perpetrator's not my problem. If you see a racist, homophobic, misogynist person, you can clock them a mile away and you can avoid them like the plague, right? It's the bystanders that are the problem. A young girl came up to me after I spoke in Melbourne to 600 people, and she was from India and she was here as an engineer. And she said that she was out one day, they were working on a infrastructure project and they were looking at a stormwater trench. And a pretty normal thing to do. A group of people, men and women, she was the youngest engineer, pretty fresh on the scene. The project manager, who happened to be an older white man, came up, put his arm around her, brought her in nice and tight, given her some nice hip rubs. I've never been in a situation on a construction site where you need to hug someone when you look at a stormwater trench. I've actually never had to hug anyone on site to do anything. The issue with this whole thing was no one said a word. Right? So everyone just stood there and saw this and didn't say a word. Afterwards, they walked over to her, a couple of them, and went, "You all right? That was really creepy." They instantly made it her problem and her burden to bear. Not one person went to that man and went, "That was really inappropriate, don't ever do that again. That's not acceptable behaviour." Not one. So who's the problem? Is it old mate Huggable, or is it everybody else who saw it and did absolutely nothing? It's everyone else, right? Because it's really easy to get rid of him when you stand there together as a group and say no. And she was never going to be strong enough and courageous enough to do it, because why should she? Why should she have to walk that alone? I'll give you another example. All of you would have seen this, you would have heard it, you would have been a part of it. How many times have you stood in an office, maybe around the water cooler, and someone's told a really off-colour joke? Could be racist, could be homophobic, could be misogynist, could be something else. But it's not nice. But we stand there really awkwardly, and some of us will laugh. I've done it. I've laughed awkwardly and gone, I don't really want to laugh, but I'm going to do it. Some people will just stay silent. Some people will laugh out loud because it's their thing. But no one says, that's not welcome here. That's not even funny. Don't say that. It's uncomfortable. If we don't do that, if we don't find that little pocket of courage that exists, we don't change culture anywhere. Not in construction, not in transport, not in society, not in our communities where it needs to happen. Why are we so scared of speaking up? Why are we so scared of making people uncomfortable? Everyone's offended these days. Who cares? Everyone's offended, right? Why are we so scared of offending the people that hold the most amount of power? There's a certain demographic, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, that do these types of things. It's not my job to make you comfortable. I've been uncomfortable for almost 29 years of my career. I will make you awkward and I will revel in it, because welcome to the shit show. It's not nice, is it? It's not my job to make you comfortable. But it's your job, and particularly as women, if you want to talk about women supporting women, here's another one. You would have all known or seen if there's a promotion going at work and a woman goes for that promotion, what stops you from walking into your director or your manager or your boss or whoever it is up the food chain to go, pick her? Pick her, even if she doesn't tick all the boxes. Pick her because she's the best woman for the job and it's about time we had a woman in leadership. What stops you from doing that? Nothing really, does it? And you might not even like her. You don't have to. You don't have to like, here's a grain for you. You don't have to like other women to support them. Sit with that for a sec. There are loads of women in construction I don't like, by the way, and there's plenty that don't like me. That's okay. We don't have to. We're not all going to be besties. It's not the way the world works. We all have different values, but there's got to be a common theme of value that picks us all together. You don't have to like other women to support them. You see women posting something on LinkedIn, even if you don't like the way she has her hair or makeup or the shoes she wears or something else, like it, share it, comment. Show solidarity and support, because this is who we are and no one is coming to save us. If we want things to change, we will have to change them. Guess what? Women's problems are always up to women to fix, except for Phil, he'll come fix it with us as well. But that's the reality of it, right? If we're not going to support each other, if we're not going to do those little things, if we're not going to stand up and get really, really uncomfortable, things aren't going to change. They're not going to change in my industry, they're sure as shit not going to change in yours. We've got to stop being so quiet. Don't be afraid to stand out in awkwardness. Don't be afraid to make people uncomfortable. The last thing I want to touch on is imposter syndrome. I was at a speaking event last week. Hot topic for women. It's actually a hot topic for men as well. Men just hide it better. Men know they're pretty useless most of the time. They're just really good at hiding it. You got me, Phil. Sorry, Phil. Usually I try and spread it around the room, but it's just you. So, I was asked, how do you conquer imposter syndrome? The other week, you don't. I thought I was pretty confident. I thought I had everything together. And then in January of this year, I sat there at the Arboretum with all of the other state and territory nominees for Australian of the Year and went, why am I here? I don't belong here. I'm not good enough. The stuff I do, I'm not curing cancer. I'm not trying to cure my own brain cancer and experimenting on myself to save other lives. I'm not doing all of this other work. I'm not a mother who has lost her son to racial violence and is now speaking about peace and love and bringing community together. I'm not that. Why am I here and what am I doing? And then I finally realised, after I started listening to the good advice of the people and the support network around me, who said, you're not meant to cure brain cancer. You're not meant to do those things. You're meant to stand up for a certain group of people who need to see you and need to believe that they can do the same thing. Because out there are plenty of women who are being told they can't do a job because they're female. There are women who are not getting paid properly because they're too scared to speak up. There are women getting hugged on site who don't have any support. That's why I'm here. And it's not about the awards. None of that actually matters. It's about being a voice and being a beacon for people who need it. And that's not everyone, and I don't want it to be everyone because I'm already too busy. But I have to be that, and you can be that too. And it's really important that every single one of you start to do that same thing. Be the person that you might have needed when you were younger. Look for the people who need that support. Be the person who someone's going to come and stand on your shoulders and bring the next generation through and be that strength. And get awkward and uncomfortable. That's the only way you make change. But we can do it if we do it together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jo, for that incredible, powerful and insightful story. Thank God for Uncle Jeff and Alison Myrams, and secretly, I think your mum is a superstar. We are going to open for questions now. We'll have this roaming mic. I think we've only got one. Who would like to ask Jo a question? Caroline.
Hi, I'm Caroline Wilkie. I'm the CEO of the Australasian Railway Association. Jo, that was just amazing. Thank you. We've just done a major piece of work around diversity in the rail sector, and it's pretty shockingly bad. Same deal in terms of women experiences. But I'd love to hear more about what you're doing now in the ACT within this construction community to try to change perceptions and to engage women in the sector, because we've got, I think, I'm going to get the stat wrong, I think it's like 26% of our sector is women. We have a retirement cliff coming in 2034, and when all the blokes over 50 who are white leave the sector by 2034, who are there now, we don't have a workforce to come in behind. So that's why we're pushing the gender issue. But obviously we want to make women's experience more positive. So anyway, I'd love to hear what you're doing here.
Controversially, we work on a premise of positive discrimination, and I know that might seem a bit wrong in one sense, but what we did was we basically went out to recruiters. So the first thing I did when I stepped into Kane was say to recruiters, if you want to put forward people, because we obviously need to employ, I sacked 35 people in the first month that I walked into Kane, and that was values-based. So I had one guy turn around in a team meeting say, I won't work for a woman. I said, good for you, there's the door. So, you know, there was a high staff turnover because it was, here's our values and here's who we're going to be, and you're either in or you're out. And it was a very, very clear-cut, straight-cut conversation. So we then went to recruiters and said, if you're putting candidates forward, I want a male and a female candidate, or non-binary. I want diversity. And if you can't find diversity, then you're not a recruiter that we want to work with, because you're obviously not in touch with the base. And, you know, one recruiter turned around and said, oh, well, we can't find women, then you're not doing your job properly. So get out there and actually start getting women interested in our industry and start doing all of those things, because it's the women are there who want work, they just need the pathway into it. So we very, very openly said that we would always, for any role, regardless of the role, that we would interview not just male candidates. We always paid higher than the other advertised rates for other companies. And we always encouraged women who are returning to work or women who are coming off maternity leave to apply for jobs, and that we would offer more work flexibility around that, so more working from home, more flexibility around the construction site. So we went from 6% when I started in 2020 to 48% in 12 months. Wow. And so, you know, when people say, oh, it's too hard or you can't do it, I'm going to say sorry, but you're not doing your job properly. You absolutely can do it. The other thing we did was introduce the same parental leave policy for men. So one of the things that we found is women couldn't return to work because men couldn't be primary caregivers. And so, you know, if you want to make an industry, you know, better for women to be attracted to, then make it a better place for men to work as well, and make the work flexibility as equal too, because there's a lot of onus on women being primary caregivers and having to do the kid pick up and the drop off, and if the kid's sick, you know, to go and deal with that, but not the same as men. I mean, I remember a site manager that was laughed from one end of the site to the other when he said he was picking up his sick daughter. And so we give out, you know, I think the standard's 2 weeks of leave for men. What can a man do in 2 weeks to support his wife and child? Nothing, absolutely nothing. So we extended all of that, and then by default we found that we were attracting more people because there was a lot more flexibility in it. And again, that didn't affect our bottom line, it didn't impact our delivery of our projects, and it actually made quality people actually come. So it's having the right conversations with recruiters, and it's having the right things in place to actually make it a nicer working place for everyone, and then you'll by default get those people attracted.
I think there was another hand up.
I was just going to...
Hi everyone, I'm Angela from Engineers Australia. My question was only a short one, and that was, are you still CEO of Kane?
So I'm the General Manager of Kane ACT.
Gee, okay, fantastic, thanks. Oh, I may as well ask while I've got the mic. And the other question I have is around your not-for-profit side of what you've been doing. So obviously it underpins the social fabric of the ACT and is wonderful. So what are you doing in that space now?
So we've just put in a grant application to do a program. So federal government released a government grant, $54 million funding pool. So we've just put in a grant to do a holistic program of employment, mentoring and culture reform, which we are already doing with some private companies but want to do it en masse in Canberra. I've got 73 women currently in our mentoring program, and they're from a diverse range of backgrounds and ages. And what we're looking at now is sort of peer-to-peer mentoring, so developing the next generation. So women who are sort of fourth year or qualified and have a bit of experience now, and they can provide that advice, really creating that strong network and that strong fabric of support for younger women. So it was... I had some pretty serious incidents. You sort of go through these positives and negatives of you think you got some wins, and we see sort of 10 or 12 of our young girls go through our school program and get full-time employment, and then we lost 4 last year who are still on workers' comp because of serious sexual harassment and assault incidences on site, and that was November last year. So, when a lot of people like to come up to me afterwards, when I say people, certain people, and go, oh, it's not that bad anymore, and it's like, all right, well, come and walk for a week in my shoes and I'll show you what it really looks like. So yes, there's some phenomenal things happening. Yes, we're doing a lot of work. Yes, there is a massive uptake for women to now start to think that they can do it, particularly school-age girls who are like, yep, I can do this. Can we keep them safe and protected? No. So there's still that challenge.
Hi, I'm Ingrid from the Australasian College of Road Safety. I'm just wondering what the role of unions has been in your journey, and you don't have to answer that in public if you don't want to, but...
I'm not afraid of anything like that. We were having that conversation. I have a fractious relationship with the CFMEU, in particular because they're our union. I know you have a different one. I'm highly critical of their current practices. I'm really happy that they've gone into administration. I believe that the union has a strong role to play, and I believe that it's got to exist because it's got to temper the capitalist corporate white-collar side of construction, which is pretty brutal and doesn't really see workers as human beings. But I was appalled at the fact that someone like John Setka, who is a known family violence perpetrator, was sitting at the head and so vocal and no one would stand up to him. I got criticised quite publicly by them when I was down in Melbourne for not being supportive of the union, and I said, well, get rid of him and people who think like him and you've got my 100% support. So I don't hide from the hard conversations, but I don't make excuses for their behaviour. So I would like to see them step into a new world of actually supporting women and doing all those things, and I believe that's in direct contradiction when they have certain people like that who are wearing the same badge as them. So I think they need to probably have a bit of a reckoning and start being honest about who they want to be, and then they can join it. But at the moment, they're at arm's distance from me.
Hello, Lauren Fraser from GHD. Thank you so much for that presentation. It was very vulnerable and powerful. Often you mention the bystanders. They are often of the majority group, men, that could stand up and say something when something doesn't sound right. I do get the impression sometimes men are afraid to have discussions around this topic because they're afraid of saying something wrong. Do you have any tips or advice for encouraging safe spaces for those discussions? And what would you recommend?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I do get a lot of men who come and say exactly that and say, I'd really love to speak up, but I'm worried that it's going to look like I'm trying to be a hero or the white knight, or I'm stepping on toes. And it's a hard one to navigate because depending on the situation, there's so much nuance to it. I always encourage them to be the ally standing shoulder to shoulder in a situation where a woman is taking the lead. You're there to echo. Whatever she says, you echo, because then it's reinforced with a male voice. If it's not initiated by her and you do think that you need to step in, then step in and deal with the consequences later. And if you get, a bit of a hamstringing afterwards around, oh, well, don't do that because I can stand up for myself, okay, fine. But it's that whole thing about, if a guy holds a door open for me, I don't start waving the feminist flag. I think that's a polite, courteous gesture. I don't think it's gendered. And I think we're blurring the line a little bit on that. If people hold a door open or do certain things, they're not doing it because you're female. It's just a nice thing to do. And I think sometimes that the militancy of how we're standing up for ourselves blurs the lines for them, and it's very, very mixed messages. And so I think that we need to allow men to stand up for us, but also have our voices heard. There's a difference between a man speaking on behalf of you as opposed to supporting what you're saying. And so as long as you've still got a voice in the situation, I think it's a good thing. And I don't think that we should sort of analyse necessarily how they do it, but it's a minefield for the blokes as well. And I think sometimes that they get unfairly criticised in that way.
Hi, Tasha Prabhakar from 9 Squared, and actually I work with Phil, so thumbs up to Phil. And I was interested in actually women supporting other women, and you talked about LinkedIn and so on, but in my experience that's been a curious minefield of some women struggling with that. Do you have any views on or further comment on that?
It's a hard one. Probably I think that recently, I'm saying recently is the past 4 or 5 years, particularly since I started Build Like a Girl, my strongest criticism has come from other women. I run on the ethos of you can criticise me if you're in the trenches. If you're in the cheap seats throwing stones, I'm not interested. I think that we are conditioned to be really competitive and really hypercritical of each other. And that is because that historically there has only been one spot at the top and we've all got to kill each other to get there. And so that is still very much entrenched. One of the first things I did at Kane was employ Philippa Selden, who's my operations manager. And when we did the organisation chart, she sits right next to me. So there's no me sitting at the top of the food chain. And that was a visual demonstration to show that we were there together as 2 women, not just one. And that was going to be our leadership model, and that Philippa would look after this stuff and I'd look after that stuff, and on any given day that changes. So it's got to be how we be better and bring some of those particular women on the journey. Again, like I said, it's you don't necessarily have to like someone, you don't have to share a glass of wine every Friday. It's not about that. Anyone who is doing the work to our benefit or doing something that's in support of or making our lives better in some way, you should be supporting, because that's how the change happens. And so, I think it's just we've got to get over ourselves in that way a bit. We've got to stop being so petty. It's something the guys are great at. And have you ever been in a situation where the guys are standing around and they'll be absolutely shit-canning another bloke, and then he walks over and they're like, oh, g'day, mate, and shake his hand. And it's like they're best friends. You stand there going, but you were just a second ago, you were like, women are terrible at that. We would not do that. And so we've got to understand that, yes, we're conditioned in a certain way, and it's not about hormones or emotions or, feminine stuff. It's not about that. It is the way that we're raised to understand that there's only one spot, and that competitiveness needs to go. So if another woman succeeds ahead of you, cheer her all the way through, because that is a statement. And if it means you've missed out, try harder.
Hi, Jo. Rita Excel. I've got my own business advisory organisation. But I was interested in your experience regarding the pay and the pay difference. I had a very similar experience when I was an engineer in a council, just amalgamated, and, changes in your roles, and more senior, older, not senior, not even a qualified engineer, and I'm a civil engineer with 30 years experience. At the time, I'd only had 10. And somebody weaponised, I believe they weaponised sending me his promotion that hadn't been, offered to me, weaponised it to get rid of me out of that role. I wonder what, with your receiving that payroll, the summary of somebody else, did you sense that you were given that to, support you, or do you think to make you realise, or maybe to leave and resign? I still struggle with that, decision to resign and leave. Now I wonder what, you ended up resigning as well. Just interested where you saw that, the impetus to send you that information.
I did ask her, and she was appalled by it and just couldn't keep it in any longer. So she had worked with them in payroll for, I think, 37 years. And she said that she had seen the same thing happen to all of the other women in the business, and that she knew that I would fight it and make a statement when no one else had. So I did ask, because I was the same. Is this a dig at me, to sort of go, you're less than? And so I had to ask the question to know myself. And it was absolutely that reason. And she said, I knew that you would fight it in some way and at least raise it. And she said, I didn't want you to leave. I was hoping that they'd turn it around, but it brought it to light. Apparently that conversation that I had, 3 other women left that business after me. And it started a conversation with those people to actually have a look at that. So I'm not quite sure if anything did change, but it certainly raised some eyebrows and again got some conversation flowing that hadn't flown before. So, but yeah, it was that... I'm the same as you. It was kind of like, would things have been different, or if I'd sort of approached it a different way? I don't know. It came down to the advice, and it came down to values, and it sort of worked itself out for me.
That concludes our session for today. It's time for lunch. Please continue the conversation if you can stick around for lunch. Thank you again, Jo. Please join me in thanking Jo. If you can stay, we'd love you to continue the conversation.